Yesterday, as a standardized measure of cardiovascular ability, I did 500 calories as shown on the Assault Bike Pro X. In this, I want to show what other images I add in order to document this properly. So first of all, I take a picture of the main image. First of all, I stop, but I pause, because then later on I can press the stop, which sometimes allows me to go and get my phone, because sometimes I start without the phone. The pausing gives me basically additional time buffer. And also, if somebody else in the meanwhile would start this bike, then he would see the pausing and maybe would not continue to basically reset the device and not allow me to then take a picture. What I also do now is I take pictures at 100 calories and on 250, but the 100 calorie picture was lost because I also enter these values then in seconds, because Guava Health does not allow any other input, so I can basically enter a numeric input. I set it to seconds, and then I basically just have the seconds. I need to basically convert the time from the picture, because that's the time I take as the main time. So in this case, it was 55 minutes and 13 seconds for the 500 kilocalories. I then visit this Page Omni calculator, which allows me to enter the time, 55 minutes and 13 seconds, which then allows me to cross-compare these different activities I am doing, or rather, basically these different tests of cardiovascular ability that in my case are the most standardized test I can take, I think. And then I click here on plus for the log 500 kilocalories on the Assault Bike Pro X. Then I enter the 3,313 seconds, and I also in the notes add the actual time, which was 55 minutes and 13 seconds. I then click on add, and this now enters basically an additional data point, which I then can take a look at. I can, for example, see that my lowest data point here is 2.5k seconds. Or is this even lower? No, it is not. And then I very quickly can compare myself, my cardiovascular ability over time, without the need for an additional assessment like VO2 Max, even though obviously VO2 Max has lots more data behind it, with data meaning studies and so on and so forth. All of these data points here have been done on the Assault Bike Pro X, just on different bikes in different gyms. I also have a Guava Health custom metric for 250 calories and also for the 100 calories. I often do the 100 calories since it takes about 8 to maybe 12 minutes for me on average, or on average with a certain range. I often do them after a strength training workout to get some additional cardiovascular benefit in. Now, I also take a picture of what appears after one presses stop. So first of all, the main screen appears, which is this one. And then it switches to max values. So this is basically the peak wattage I basically rode when driving. But also it shows me the peak speed. It also shows me the peak RPM and also my peak heart rate. At least the heart rate, I assume, is also peak. Then it also shows me my average heart rate, which I have recorded in the Garmin activity anyway. But since Garmin does not get the power data from the Assault Bike Pro X, I then additionally added via another app. So I here have the average values, I have the average speed, I have the average watts. So the average watts are actually now a pretty useful number, which can be again converted into calories using the calorie to joules formula, and then joules per second are again watts. What I also began doing, even though that then becomes quite a little bit of work, to then take a picture of at least the recovery time and also the training effect on my Garmin watch, in this case the Garmin Fenix 6S Pro. I often have seen that, especially if I include a couple of anaerobic sprints, so basically trying a couple of times to now go all out, I can get to an anaerobic training effect also. Unfortunately, at least on the 6S Pro, it does not show my training load afterward. On these 500 calories on the Assault Bike, but my peak training effect was tempo, for example, sometimes also sprint, but mostly I think it was tempo. And I had a training effect sometimes, or at least in something I have recently seen, of above 4.0 in aerobic, and sometimes I have anaerobic maybe above 1 or something like this. And the highest Garmin load I had was, I think, 200 or something like this. And this with the same 500 calories. And in this 500 calories, in which I had a bigger training effect, it probably also took me less time. So it was a more time-efficient training, one could say. Now, additionally, I also took this picture here in order to cross-compare, because today or yesterday, when I did this, I actually had a very low heart rate all the time, and I was not able to go much higher. I assume this is because I have been fasting for about 20 hours before and only drank protein shakes before this. I actually have not been fasting for that long, but I have been drinking a protein shake before, and I wanted to compare it to the calories shown on the assault bike, which usually are a little bit more conservative. But in this case, because I had such a low heart rate, the Garmin calories actually were lagging behind the Assault Bike Pro X, which again kind of make a point that I standardize basically the caloric estimation by using the assault bike all the time as basically the metric of distance, which I try to hit by basically hitting this certain energy output of 500 kilocalories. Now, one thing that is additional is this here, and this is now power data directly from the assault bike, which I have tested out with different indoor cycling apps. And Wahoo is a company that makes indoor cycling sensor, which is called the Wahoo KICKR. It also makes, I think, now sport watches and something like this. Now, what I have been doing is I have been able to connect the Wahoo app to the Assault Bike Pro X and thus get power data. As you can kind of see here, there is also a power curve, which is also seen here, which I don't quite understand because I doubt that initially I have like 800 watts, and then I think this is kind of the power curve, that it calculates this power curve afterwards. And because this here is also not a very good scaled graph, so it's here like 10 minutes and then it's 20 minutes. I think this might be similar to the performance metric power curve I can find in Garmin. And since I did via Zwift basically connect the Assault Bike Pro X, I now also have a power curve, and it looks also very similar. So it begins at 800 watts, and then we have after 10 minutes approximately, let's see here, about 300 watts. So now we are in the actual Wahoo app. And here in history, I have my air biking session. I created a profile called air biking, and now here I can basically see the summary. The heart rate is basically transmitted via the broadcast heart rate feature. So I connect my Garmin Fenix 6S Pro both to the Assault Bike Pro X, on which then there is also heart rate data, as you have seen. And I also connected to the Wahoo app. Now this allows me to basically have a digitized power graph, which I otherwise could not get, only if I recorded it via an indoor cycling app, which would also be possible. But for these apps, I would have to run basically the indoor cycling app itself, and I actually do not need it. I do not need a gamified environment around me. Now, unfortunately, the Wahoo app does not have a direct Garmin integration, which means I don't have this power data now in my Garmin activity, but I have the separate Garmin activity, which basically does not have the cadence data and so on in it. But what I found that I can do still is basically take a screenshot of all of this, and then I do have the power chart here, which is basically also an estimation of if I would go all out, I think, then this would be the power output of mine. And I also have heart rate zones, which are calculated slightly differently. The main thing though is, I think, the power chart, in which one ideally could see that I do have a couple of sprints in here. So you can actually see them all. So here, for example, is a sprint, here is a sprint, here. So basically, I try to, within one activity, it is a cardiovascular activity, but I try to include also anaerobic sprints in order to basically also create an anaerobic effect on top of the cardiovascular benefit I therefore also create, because I have an accumulated higher heart rate.